That's good to know. Okay, now, wipe the sweat off my brow.
That's going to be the first one. Pull that up.
Hello, how are you? Thank you. I know, and I'm pleased to see that you're. No, I know, it's not easy. You know what, for us, it's really important. No, and you did great. You really did great.
Okay, folks, we're going to begin in just a minute. If I could ask the participants, if you see your name up here, come on up and sit down in front of your name. And we'll get started as soon as we get this new computer fired up. If you get it working.
Oh, yeah.
That's for the Article 53. Yeah. Okay. There you go. Great. David Morrison. What I'm going to do is, you're the one who can. What I'm going to do is have you I'm going to see, so we're going to do the idea. Somebody else is done. Oh, that's not. You know what I'll do? I don't need any more than
Yeah, I laid plates here.
So what I thought we'd do is get you here, then I'll sit here as the moderator.
Hey, Patty. How are you? I'm okay. How are you?
Good to see you.
Hi, Jervis.
Welcome back.
Thank you.
When did you get back?
Let's see. I guess it was last week.
Oh, okay. You went to Florida?
I did. Yeah. Relaxing.
Yeah.
Oh, really? It's nice. Yeah.
Whoever computer it is.
That's Matt. Okay.
You're Mr. Leonard, right?
I am.
Okay, here's your name.
Peter Morrison? All right, pleasure.
Good. You're the guy about the...
I am.
How are you? Good to see you. Yeah, great.
Well, I will try to do that. All righty. Starting with me? Or starting at the other end? Oh, this is the order we're in. Okay. Got it.
Close to last, so that's good.
That's
You're
good.
warmed up, feel comfortable.
I had no idea until I walked in the room. I saw my name from the back.
They have, if you want, they have coat hangers up there.
Just for 2
minutes.
Probably will.
I swear, I think it was last year, Jim. That was like 5 people here. That's true. Wasn't there a big one of the went bigger? She's like started falling off.
You still have some computer with no, we don't. They sort of said they thought
I know. But we're getting
Well, the most important thing is the filming. Yeah, I guess.
Great. I love it. Thank you.
Okay, we ready? Okay, ladies,
Sarah.
gentlemen, members of the audience, welcome
to Meet the Articles. This is a program sponsored, organized by the Nantucket Civic League. I think we're organized. We're ready to go. We have an open town meeting, a form of government, where our town meeting is actually our legislative body. Our legislature meets once a year unless we have a special meeting. And, of course, we'll be voting this year on 111 warrant articles. We'll be working on a budget that will be taking, that won't go into effect until July 1st this year. So we're actually budgeting for 12 to 16 months out from the time that we actually vote. On this particular warrant, there are a number of warrant articles that deal with zoning, and the 8,000 registered voters that we have here on Nantucket, we anticipate about 10% of those voters will be participating in town meeting. So what that says is that your vote is very important. Everyone who shows up at town meeting, we hope, we the Civic League hope, will be informed on the articles that are important. Obviously, they're all important articles to someone. This program, Meet the Articles, is designed to have the people who are putting forth these articles, the ones that we have selected, to explain why these articles are on the warrant, what the impact will be for the community, for the long-range impact of the community. And so thank you for coming. We have a wonderful turnout today. There will be an opportunity, of course, for questions. As we go along, if you raise your hand, we'll pass out cards, and you can write down your question. We'll be sure that we get to your questions at the end of the program. Without further ado, then, it's my pleasure to introduce Peter Morrison, Vice President of the Nantucket Civic League, who will moderate today's event. So, without further ado, Peter.
I'd like to welcome you all to today's forum, Meet the Articles. I'm your moderator today, and just as a brief advertisement, the Nantucket Civic League has as its mission to promote the general welfare of Nantucket through informed citizen participation in community affairs. And the League represents 22 neighborhoods and over 1,900 dues-paying families. Today's program is designed to inform you as attendees and actually the many more voters who are going to watch this in subsequent broadcasts, and you can tell your friends also that this will be available video on demand so they can watch it at their convenience. The articles featured today are listed on your program, which is the blue handout, and I hope you all have a copy or you're sitting next to someone with it. And for each article, the presenter or presenters will explain in 6 minutes or less what this article is intended to accomplish and how it's intended to do so. So our aim is simply to clarify what the rationale is for the article without getting into any debate about its merits or shortcomings. At 2:30, we're going to transition into questions from you in the audience. And at any time during the program, we ask that you, when we're going through the articles, you raise your hand if you want to get a note card. Someone will deliver a note card and a pen. You can write out your question, give the question to someone who will then bring it to me. And then what I'm going to do is organize them so we have an orderly flow of questions, which I will direct to the appropriate speaker. So anytime you have a question during the thing, just raise your hand. Our first topic is the Hospital Overlay District, Article number 70. And sitting to my right, your left, is Jim Kelly, the hospital CEO, who is here to explain what this article is intended to accomplish and how it would do so. Jim?
Thank you, Peter. Good afternoon, everyone. Over the last 2 years, Nantucket Cottage Hospital has explored several location options for a new hospital to serve Nantucketers for generations to come. This is your hospital, and so we've listened carefully to thoughtful input from the community. We've heard you, and as a result, we've refined our plans and now ask for your support to build a critically needed new facility at the present hospital site. The hospital was built in 1957 prior to zoning on Nantucket and was built based on a medical model that is not in existence today. Annual Town Meeting Article 70, recommended by the Board of Selectmen, the Planning Board, and the Finance Committee, seeks zoning changes required for a new hospital, allowing modern use of the property to comply with zoning and providing flexibility with regard to site planning. So what should you know about Article 70? First of all, no taxpayer appropriation is being sought. The new hospital will be constructed solely with private donations. Secondly, a two-thirds vote is required for passage, without which we cannot proceed for plans for a new hospital on our site. Article 70 allows for a modern, state-of-the-art hospital to improve care, to provide drastically needed privacy, and to meet State Department of Public Health standards and to recruit and retain key medical specialists. The rezoning sets forth the rules applicable to a hospital redevelopment, but does not approve a specific site plan. The hospital and some surrounding parcels will be placed in the commercial neighborhood district and the Nantucket Cottage Hospital Overlay District. Within these zoning districts, any proposed hospital redevelopment will be subject to comprehensive site plan review with input from town departments and members of the public through a series of public hearings. Nantucket needs a new hospital. It needs it now, and a delay in passing Article 70 could postpone that project. I'm going to show you a slide that just kind of redefines as what I spoke to about Article 70. So Article 70 rezones the hospital site and some surrounding parcels into the commercial neighborhood district, including some unnamed ways abutting the site. It amends certain provisions of the existing bylaw and creates the Nantucket Cottage Hospital Overlay District. What the overlay district does is to define the hospital use. When hospital was built in 1957, zoning came in 1972, and the zoning says hospital, but its uses are not defined in the model of current healthcare delivery. The hospital overlay district sets forth parking requirements and allows for both on-site and off-site parking within the overlay. It allows some additional height, and it applies major site plan review to a new hospital development. The advantage of the new hospital and of Article 70 is, as I said earlier, no public funding is needed. The result of Article 70, we'll be able to build a hospital with enhanced services, including urgent care. We're going to have increased availability of specialists. Right now, if you want to see a wide range of our specialists, because of space limitations, it's a 3-month waiting list, so we want to be adding additional dermatologists, neurologists, and oncologists, just for a few examples. We need the ability to maintain and enhance medical service on the island, including the MRI and dialysis. These are just 3 words: increase patient privacy, but it is really integral to what we need to deliver for our patients. The hospital was built in 1957. In 1957, all surgeries were inpatient. In 2015, all of our surgeries are outpatient. We don't have the facilities to provide the privacy that we need to perform that well. We need adequate parking, and critically important, we need the zoning and the new facility to be able to recruit more primary care physicians and their specialists. So, what might a site plan look like? This is our existing site at 57 Prospect. This is the existing hospital now. In our conceptual plan would be the new building here for the inpatient and high technology services. We would maintain this building here, which is the configuration of the medical office spaces. And this we would tear this building down, the main hospital, and add additional parking. So that's just a conceptual plan, but that's kind of what we're looking at providing in the future. So how's it going to look? When you walk in the doors in the new hospital, you're going to see new technology, bright, inviting, or really a healing environment is what we're going to be striving for within the building. But as you drive up to the building, as you walk up and you walk in the front door, it needs to look like a Nantucket building. And this is the rendering that we're striving for. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jim. And for those of you who would like to have a copy of the handout, I know Jim wants you to pick up a copy at the back of the room. It looks like this. They're on both sides, so go get one. And as I say, if you have questions, raise your hand and start submitting them. Next, we're going to hear from Rick Atherton, Chair of the Board of Selectmen, and Patty Roggeveen on Articles 89 and 90, the Mill Hill land trade and rezoning. And you each have 6 minutes to explain the rationale here.
Thanks. Mr. Miller's going to join me in this brief discussion. And I'll start out by just pointing out and reminding us, we've heard from Mr. Kelly about the need for a new hospital. I think it's clear the hospital's scope of operations today, I like to say, are 40% larger than 7 years ago. Mr. Kelly said 30%, but they're significantly, we have a different hospital than we had 5, 10, 15 years ago. Articles 89 and 90 are drafted in order to make a citizen article that was proposed to allow the use of some of Mill Hill Park in the hospital's plans for its building, because the citizen article was flawed and council felt it could not be corrected. So council drafted 89 and 90. What they do is give the authority to use a small portion. We don't have a map, but there is a map included as part of our package of maps for the town meeting, not an extensive portion of Mill Hill. And the zoning would, that's 89, allows the transfer of the property for hospital use or healthcare use. Article 90 would change the zoning for that small portion of Mill Hill Park to CN. And again, that would allow the hospital, if they choose. And what I want to emphasize is this is a permissive article. It gives the opportunity for the hospital, as they design their facility, to use that piece of land for the community's benefit. I think it makes sense, but town meeting will have to decide about that. The article, as originally drafted, included an offset under the state Article 97, or what is it, 97? Make sure I get the number right.
97, yes.
97 requires an offset when parkland is used for another use. And early on in the article, it proposed the portion of the water company. The motion approved by the Finance Committee for 89 removed that. So it's an open-ended, if the hospital chooses, the town would have to find another offset, or, and it's possible that the state legislature would not require an offset. It's not absolute that that has to happen. So again, this is a permissive article and allows the hospital to use the property if they so choose. Bruce, do you want to follow up on that? Maybe add a little bit. I should mention that the Article 89 was approved by the Finance Committee. The Board of Selectmen voted 4-1 to support the Finance Committee's motion. Article 90 was moved by the Planning Board because it's a zoning article to take no action. The Finance Committee felt differently. They felt a positive action by town meeting was appropriate on 90, and the Board of Selectmen, again, by the same 3-1 vote, voted to endorse the comments from the Finance Committee.
I would add that I feel very strongly about this article. I genuinely think as a community we have botched this whole hospital opportunity. As a citizen, I'm embarrassed at the way we've handled it. As a selectman, I'm embarrassed at the way we've handled it. And as somebody who finds myself increasingly visiting the hospital, I'm really hoping that we don't continue to botch things. Every time I drive by the Stop and Shop and I look at the magnitude of that project and the logistics that have been involved, and I try to imagine the hospital having to recreate the same kind of project under the same circumstances, I can only hope that I don't have a serious medical need during the period that the job's underway. Now, having been beaten up by the community on several occasions, they have heroically said, we're not asking for anything else. We don't need we don't need anything more. But I think we should insist that they accept this expression of the communities, because I think with a project of this complexity, no one can know how it's going to unfold. They might very well need a small amount of land as a logistical staging area, much like the Stop and Shop has had. They might very well discover that they have to make a minor modification to their plan that would simply be impossible because they're restricted so much by the limited amount of land. And I just find it hard to imagine that in a community that has 12 or 13 or 14,000 of open space, acres of open space, that we can't find it in ourselves to maybe make an acre or two available for a project that I think is as important as anything else we're facing in the next 20 or 30 years. So that's my point of view and why I'm strongly supporting this. Thank you.
We meaning there's a group of us on the island that are very concerned about this particular piece of property. There's a couple of levels of which our concern, where our concern comes. Number one, well, I think Bruce has made a real passionate argument for the hospital's sake. It has not been asked for by the hospital, and it seems a little bit more like putting the cart before the horse and maybe leaving us in a position of giving a blank check in the terms of design and use if we don't at least have a plan to consider with respect to this property. Ultimately, this property is not just a piece of land in many respects. I think that Annie has done a lot of work. Some others in the community have done a lot of work to basically look at the history of this particular parcel. The parcel itself dates back a very long time as far as its use as open space. It's the original parkland in Nantucket. It's also got a number of plantings on it, so it's not just essentially been left fallow. It's been used and planted with some of the most wonderful species of plants that we do share in flowers on the island, and I think for that, at that level, it's something that needs to be respected and to be at least considered more broadly than just if the hospital should need this, then the hospital would have the opportunity to take it. The parcel itself sits in a wonderful space for the use by the community. The residential areas around it, it's near town. It's one of the few parcels that we have as accessible in that particular neighborhood. And I do think that the hospital, should it come forward with a need, would be well served in terms of having the discussion happen as to whether or not its needs for this particular parcel outweigh the value that it has historically and as a piece of open space for us on the island. Right now, just saying, well, the hospital needs this, can get us tied up in the whole question of whether we need a new hospital or not. This is a small parcel of land that's not necessary to a new hospital. The new hospital can happen without this parcel of land. If it should come to a place where that parcel is necessary, then that's the question that we need to answer. We don't need to answer it before we know that it's a necessity. And again, the emotional charge and the sympathy that I have for a new hospital is strong, but it's not gone so far as to say, let's open up the possibilities of taking such a precious part of this island and handing it over to what is essentially an unknown in terms of need or use, for that matter. So, again, I would urge us to wait on Article 89 and 90, and that to look at this as a bigger picture than just what the hospital might need going forward.
Thank you both. I will say parenthetically that when you use the hospital, it makes you a big fan of the hospital, speaking from experience. Next, we're going to hear from our planning director, Andrew Vorse, who's going to explain Article 47 and what it is intended to accomplish. Andrew?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, everyone. Andrew Vorst, Director of Planning, I would like to recognize 3 of our planning board members here, Barry Rector, the chairman, Nat Lowell, and Linda Williams in the back. Article 47 is an article that creates that actually does 2 things. It creates 2 new districts called R5 and R10 Limited, and also is a map change putting the Pine Valley neighborhood into the newly created R10 Limited District. And this discussion has been going on some time with our friends and neighbors in Pine Valley. We do want to recognize them as an active participant ever since the master plan was first proposed. They've generated ideas, and they were one of the first groups to rezone. They were in a commercial district originally and moved to R10. In this particular neighborhood, there are private deed restrictions that limit each property to a single dwelling. It prevents duplexes and other uses that are allowed in the R5 and R10 regular zoning. So they asked, is there a way, also it's worth noting that some of those restrictions may be expiring. There's a 30-year restriction on private deed restrictions, and those would be expiring, and they wanted to take action to preserve the existing character that I think everybody can recognize in that neighborhood. So we at the planning board don't like to create neighborhood-specific zoning districts, but we did think that there was value in creating a subset of the R5 and R10 Limited. And what we have come up with is the 2 districts. The main difference is that duplexes, which are allowed by right in R5 and are perfectly reasonable in some locations, would be prohibited in the limited districts. And in R5, the ground cover changes from 40% to 30%, which is similar to the R1 district. And eventually, we think that the R5 limited could be used in some of those areas. The second part is the actual map change, which do we have a map of the? There it is. So that shows you the extent of the Pine Valley neighborhood, and this article has a positive recommendation from the planning board.
Thank you, Andrew. I was carrying on a side conversation here. We next have invited representatives from the Richmond Group and from the Daffodil Lane neighborhood to explain Article 53. And I know that we have a representative from the Richmond Group. Is there anybody here from Daffodil Lane? Raise your hand. Who is going to be prepared to speak here? If you are, please come up and I will give you a tag here. And you can, why don't you sit there and just put your nameplate up in the front, okay? And introduce yourself.
Actually, I'm going to start.
Pardon?
Actually, I'm going to start.
Oh, you are? Okay. All right. Okay. So you're from Daphne?
Yep.
Let's put you...
Well, Dave's getting the map set up. I can turn on my microphone. Well, Dave's getting the map set up. Why don't I begin a little bit with some background? I am speaking as a representative of the Richmond Group, as is Dave Arminetti, who's here from the main office, which is in Wilmington, Massachusetts. As a lot of you know, a couple of years ago, almost 2 years ago now, the Richmond Great Point Development Group bought about 70 acres from Walter Gowacki, which spanned from about the corner of Lover's Lane and Old South Road straight on back all the way to Woodland Avenue, I think is one sort of border, and some of the properties that end on Daffodil Lane on the cul-de-sac there in Mayflower Lane. It was a vast kind of piece of property, and we've been, as you know, talking very publicly about developing it in different components, retail and residential, since the purchase. The original plan that we proposed for residential development was essentially an offshoot, or we we're setting up a new subdivision, but we had been building off of what was a residentially zoned area that would have attached itself to the Daffodil and to the evergreen neighborhoods in the back there. What we could have done is continued those neighborhoods. Right now, they're zoned half-acre lots. There's also a component that allows for division of those lots into condoizing them into 10,000 square foot lots, which a lot of the properties there had done, and just continued that further on over to where the residential line is drawn. We did not decide to do that, partly because we wanted to entertain the notion of ending Daffodil and ending Mayflower, so there'd never be a cut through there, which we thought was pretty, was something that the neighbors there would have preferred. And we wanted to add a bit more with respect to more affordable house lots that were smaller, maybe 5,000 square foot. So the proposal that we came up with first mixed the zoning with some 20,000 square foot lots, 10,000 square foot lots, and 5,000 square foot lots. We shared that with the planning board, heard from the neighborhood. There was a little bit of angst with respect to how the footprint was structured and how many 5,000 square foot lots we proposed. We sat down with the neighbors, reworked the plan in a way that more or less buffered the neighborhood a little bit differently with same size lots, 10,000 square foot and 20,000 square foot lots, essentially providing a buffer zone and holding back on the number of 5,000 square foot lots and really moving those closer to where there were already zoned 5,000 square foot lots along Old South Road and closer to the Naushop neighborhood, which, as you know, is 5,000 square feet. We are still working on a memorandum of understanding with the neighbors to restrict our zoning potentials and second dwellings and things of that nature even further, hoping to arrive in a place where we're all satisfied with both the availability of affordable spaces and also with the density that we might be providing to this residential area. This has been zoned residential, though, up until now, so it's not a newly zoned residential footprint. What it is a change in some respects as to the size of those lots, hoping to get some pieces that are more available, and Dave will go into detail on this, on what we're working on to do this for year-round island residents, maybe those that don't necessarily are making a little bit too much to qualify for the Covenant House, but are still interested in, not quite able to buy $1 million house, but are still interested in a home of their own. Dave?
Okay. Thanks, Patty. Good afternoon, folks. As Patty said, my name is Dave Arminetti. I'm Director of Real Estate Development for the Richmond Company and Richmond Great Point Development. Coordinate our activities here side by side with Patty and had the opportunity to interact with a good number of you, many of our neighbors, and a couple of the boards in town, and we'll hope to continue to do that over the next few years. I'll take everybody through a little bit of the maps and exhibits that we have and then describe some brainstorming that we've been doing recently to try and come up with an idea that might help us implement the program and hopefully get some more support of the larger community with respect to the affordability or the economically accessible houses that we're trying to provide here as part of the diversity of housing product that we're trying to deliver throughout our entire portfolio. The area that this speaks to is about 25% of our entire ownership out there. It's about 15 acres of rezoning. We own just a little bit over 60 acres in that entire area that's all contiguous in the area that Patty mentioned. The graphic that was up before, if we might be able to go back to that, this is an overlay that shows the site plan underneath it that we've conceptually been talking about with the planning board, the planning staff, and the neighbors predominantly in Cedar Crest and Naushop. The red lines are the proposed new zoning districts with the districts shown in the white labeling with the numbers. As Patty's mentioned, the original plan we came up with, we've reworked a little bit, primarily with discussions with the neighborhood. The density's been cut back by about 20% in total, and we've essentially tried to substitute some larger lots to transition better between the existing neighborhood and the new development. The whole intent here was to try and balance the additional density to try and provide some more economically accessible housing to the community with still trying to maintain sensitivity and compatibility with the neighborhood. That's really primarily what we're trying to do, is balance those two factors, which obviously you as a community and the planning board and the voters at town meeting try to balance all the time. The next slide shows a color version of the site plan, just a little more illustrative in terms of what we're trying to do in terms of a proposal if the zoning were proposed, that we are proposing would be approved. The next slide is an indication of the lot mix, and again, the balancing we're trying to achieve. So if you look at the 4 quadrants of the pie chart here, if we all go back to junior high school or high school, the R40 are the largest lots, the 1-acre lots. About 13% of this total area would be proposed to be changed to R40. The second largest lots would be R20. The vast majority of the existing Cedar Crest neighborhood adjacent to us is R20 from a zoning standpoint, but R10 from a practical standpoint. About 80% of the Cedar Crest 3 or Cedar Crest neighborhood on the north side of Evergreen has been converted essentially through condominium and cooperative subdivision to R10 lots. But from zoning, they are R20 lots. So we would retain about 8% of this area as R20 lots, and those would essentially be the ones that would layer right up against the Cedar Crest neighborhood to provide a transition from larger lots to smaller lots as you go from east from the airport to west towards Old South Road and the more commercial and higher density residential areas such as Naushop and Witherspoon Drive. The vast majority of the area, more than half, we would propose to be R10, which mirrors exactly what the neighborhood is developed at, 10,000 square foot lots with a single dwelling. The vast majority of the existing neighborhood has a fair amount of secondary dwellings, and I'll get into a moment how we're proposing to further restrict our zoning so that we wouldn't have duplexes and wouldn't have secondary lots across the majority of our land. And then lastly, we're proposing for a fairly small segment now to become R5 with 5,000 and 6,000 square foot lots, which now makes up a little more than 25% of our total land area. This plan is the illustrated site plan with just some notes showing the changes from the original plan that we had proposed and what we've come back with revisions and updates and compromises with our discussions with the community and the planning board and the planning staff. The yellow highlight basically shows the key change to the plan where we've substituted larger R10 lots and R20 lots where there were formerly some R5 lots proposed. So we've moved the R5, the more economically accessible housing, the smaller lots, further west away from the existing neighborhood and tried to create more of a transition. So that's physically what we're trying to do. Under current zoning, we could do a total of 33 lots. They would be larger, 20,000 square foot half-acre lots and some lug 2 lots. So essentially, we could build out today, without any further discretionary approvals from the planning board or the town, 19 homes. Given that they're all half-acre lots and lug 2 lots, those would be single-family homes, probably starting in a price range of about $2 to $2.5 million, and then the lug 2 lots would be considerably higher than that. What we're trying to do really here is respond to the housing crisis on the island, and with that balancing, try to blend ourselves in the neighborhood but achieve some higher density to get some homes that would be more at a price point in the $750,000 to $775,000 range, which is just above what the Housing Needs Covenant Program maximum sales price is this year. That sales price this year, if I'm right, Ann, is about $675,000. So that's what we're trying to achieve with this small pocket of R5 that's compatible with our adjacent commercial uses and compatible and consistent with the Naushop and Witherspoon Drive residential subdivisions adjacent to us. The last point I'll make very briefly.
Yeah, if you could quickly, because I don't want to take too much time.
People, I think, now are responding to the changes in the physical plan, but they want to be assured that the housing that's going to be more affordable is truly going to be delivered to year-round island families and that affordability is going to continue. And then the next week or a few days in a week or so, we're going to roll out what we think could be a very interesting opportunity to create essentially a hybrid of the existing Housing Covenant Need Program privately that would make all those assurances. We would enter into agreement with the town where that affordability would continue, and we'd probably just try and rise up the income level for qualification a little bit. So we'd open that affordability up to a greater window on the island, because we hear there's a gap where quite a few people can't quite qualify for the Housing Covenant Needs Program because of the income cap, but still can't afford to buy a $1 million or $2 million house. And that's the target group we're really trying to focus on, and we'll try and explain that further in the upcoming weeks before town meeting, and hopefully we can gain the support of the town. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you, Dave. We also have a representative from the Daffodil Lane neighborhood, and could you identify yourself and speak at the microphone so everybody can hear? And we'd like you to just say what you see this article intending to accomplish.
My name is Lisa Weisentanner. I live on Daffodil Lane. I did not intend coming to this meeting to sit up here and speak, but since we don't have a representative or we're not notified that we could have one, I'm here and I would like to do my best in a very simple and quick way. At this point, I think as an association in a neighborhood, we understand that working with the Richmond Group and creating an MOU is something that is in our best interest, but it does not alleviate our reservations as to not having a bigger picture. We feel like we are the very beginning of multiple steps, and that a lot of what we are getting in our future are promises but not guarantees. And that can be a very scary thing. It's not the rezoning, it's not the pictures, it's the not understanding or being able to see what's going on every place else. And I think for those that have equity tied into the value of their home, and that's their financial security going forward, that it's a very difficult thing to bet the equity of my home when I can't see what's behind the curtain. And that's a little bit scary. It's not the resistance to change. It is not the lack of wanting to work with or against. It's not having enough time to see, to understand where step 1 is going to go, and then step 2 and step 3 and step 4. And right now we're step 1. And that's a very scary place to be on the first line of a dominoes game, because we're not really sure if these promises will become guarantees. So our main concern is just lack of timing to really wrap our heads around and understand what else is the bigger picture. I feel like, you know, I hate to say the analogy, but when you're a bidding city for the Olympics and you present, there's an entire presentation of how it affects the infrastructure of everything, the traffic flow. We haven't seen any studies on how the traffic flow is going to affect. Nothing concrete. Everything is promises or hearsay. And I feel like with the equity of homes being involved in this and futures of children's college educations and everything else, that a bigger picture is not too much to ask for in making these decisions.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Next, our planning director, Andrew Vorse, will explain the zoning map changes envisioned in Articles 54 and 55. Andrew?
Thank you. Articles 54 and 55 are zoning map changes. In each case, they are moving lots from the LUG2, which requires an 80,000 square foot minimum lot, to a 40,000 square foot minimum lot. 54 and 55 are different in the following respects. 54, if we could go to that map, deals with the Cedar Crest 1 subdivision and Evergreen Lane. This is an area that has been identified early on in the master plan from 2009 it has been placed prior to that in the town overlay district. It is in a zoning district that does not match its overlay status. It was specifically identified in the master plan for a rezoning. R40 is the lowest density district in the town overlay, and all of the lots would be included in that R40 designation. So there are 25 of those lots affected in this rezoning. Article 55 is in the Surfside neighborhood, and this is an article that was encouraged by a number of residents that live in these areas who approached the planning board and asked whether we could look at this zoning. The LUG3 zoning district was established in 1973, and one of the objectives of the master plan was to reduce its scope across the island. We have increased the LUG3 zoning district, and in many cases, at least the western part of the island and included in some of the other districts, we've expanded LUG3 to cover large areas of open land and other sensitive locations. This particular change builds on other activities in the Surfside neighborhood. And just to give a breakdown here, there's two sections. Section 1 deals with the area along South Shore Road. There are 43 properties identified. There are 39 actual lots. Of those, 9 are already below the LUG2 standard in the district, and the others are possible. It is possible to look at dividing those. 9 have insufficient frontage. In Section 2, there are 27 lots. 12 of those, 14 of those are made non-conforming, so they're already below their LUG2 minimum size. 1 is very small and its status doesn't change, and then 12 of those, 4 with at least a deed restriction that is under litigation at the moment, could possibly be subdivided. The Planning Board gave this article a positive recommendation, both of these articles a positive recommendation. I would ask or remind you that there's a glossary and our Planning Board report at the end of the warrant, which will give you some more information on this.
Thank you, Andrew. Next, we are going to have Andrew again and Leslie Snell, both with the Planning Department, who will explain Articles 61, 62, and 63. And you each have 6 minutes, so you got a total of 12. Okay?
Okay. Articles 61, 62, and 63 are all proposed to address housing needs. Studies over many years have consistently identified the need for smaller units, specifically one-bedroom style studio units, and all of these articles address that need. Articles 61 and 62 were proposed by the Planning Board, and they received a positive recommendation. Article 63 was a citizen petition, and the Planning Board really appreciated the ideas included in Article 63. It was not something that they could support. It received a negative recommendation, but many of the concepts in 63 were included in the Planning Board Article 62. Article 61 is specific to the accessory dwelling unit. That's a provision in the bylaw now. It's a use that is allowed by right. And this proposal would amend the current language that has a lot of restrictions on design, and probably the restriction that is most important is on occupancy. It requires that the homeowner restrict the unit to year-round occupancy, and they have to file a covenant with the Registry of Deeds. And what we have found is that these units are not utilized. People do not seek the permits to create these units. They have to be within an owner-occupied dwelling unit. And it's really kind of the most basic form of infill housing. And the Planning Board thinks that's an important style of housing to promote. So in the amendments, the restriction on year-round occupancy has been removed. But it does have to remain in an owner-occupied dwelling unit. In Article 62, that's also a Planning Board-sponsored article with a positive recommendation. The board's proposing a new use called tertiary dwelling unit. This would be a third dwelling unit on a lot in certain locations. It would create an opportunity for additional small-scale housing units. The units would be limited to 550 square feet, which is essentially a one-bedroom style unit. It could be within an existing unit. It could be a freestanding detached unit. The board really focused on creating flexibility with this. It's allowed in the R5, R10, R20, R40, and the LUG districts. And there is a density regulation contained within that that sets a maximum bedroom count for the lots in the smaller districts. And the Planning Board did not impose that on the larger districts because there are septic limitations and other things, lower ground cover, that would restrict those units.
No.
You done?
That's it.
Okay. You actually had 12 minutes and you came in under time. Very good. Next, we're going to hear from Ann Kuspa with Housing Nantucket and Andrew Vorse again, who are going to explain the Affordable Housing Lease Article number 99. And again, you both have 6 minutes. Each of you.
Thank you. I'm Ann Cuspa, Executive Director at Housing Nantucket, and I've been selected to speak about this article because it's part of a collaborative effort to address the affordable housing need of the island. The purpose of Article 99 is to allow for a land lease at this site. It's about 6 acres in the Fairgrounds Tacoma Way district. So we've already been to town meeting, and voters have already approved developing this land for affordable housing purposes. And we're back here because we've been doing some studies, and one most notably is going on right now. It's a workforce housing needs assessment underway it's coordinated by Housing Nantucket, sponsored by the Community Foundation and others. And what we're finding is that there's a dire need for affordable rental housing on the island today. So for those of you familiar with the issue, this probably isn't a surprise, but what we're doing today is it's an act of the town, so it's a selectman-sponsored article, and it's proving that they're taking a proactive role at addressing this need for affordable housing rental units. So what we're seeing is that there's a strong demand and very low supply for small units specifically, like Leslie just alluded to. And in fact, 1 in 3 of our households on Nantucket is a renter. The town and Housing Nantucket are looking for different ways to use this site to meet the needs of the community, and we're analyzing the ways that would best fit the site. And one of the things that one of the options that we're looking at is developing perhaps a rental housing complex, a pocket neighborhood, I should say. So in this way, the town would hold a land lease and develop an RFP for developers to respond to based on criteria dictated by the selectmen. And this would help a developer because we're thinking that the land lease would be at a very low cost to them. So developing housing on Nantucket is very expensive, not only because of the land, but also because of construction costs. So by enabling the town to have a land lease with the developer at a minimal cost, it reduces the developer's costs, so it allows the housing to be more affordable for year-rounders. Let's see. Part of our analysis is looking at 3 different scenarios for the site. And this is where we might here we are. Okay, so one of the options that we're looking at is what if there were, flip back 1, please. No, that's not what I'm looking for. It's R5 lots. All right, we'll just roll with it. So if we didn't have any kind of zoning change or anything, there would be R5 lots, so it would be single-family dwellings. In this scenario, perhaps smaller units or 8-bedroom apartments could be developed. And then a third option would be the next slide, where multi-family units could be developed at this site. And this site is, in my mind, it's one of the best options that we're looking at because it clusters the housing together and provides for the opportunity for open space as well. So, next steps. In the year ahead, if we pass this Article 99, the selectmen can further analyze their options, and it gives it paves the way for selectmen to actually take action to develop housing at this site.
Thank you, Ann. Thanks. And I don't have much to add to that. I do think it's important that this is a permissive article. This allows the selectmen to move forward. It has the support of the Finance Committee, the Board of Selectmen, the NP and EDC. Part of the original purpose for purchasing this land did include an affordable housing component, and I think now I think there is a broad team, if you will, moving forward to get that implemented, and I think the timing is right. So.
Great. Thank you.
Very good. Next, we're going to consider Articles 71 and 75, and Andrew, once again, will explain these. This is the sewer district map changes envisioned in those 2 articles. Andrew?
Thank you. So I figured I would talk about actually 71 and 72, which actually covers Articles 73 and 74. So 71 and 72 are articles that were sponsored by the town. They have a positive recommendation from the Sewer Committee. Article 71 deals with property in Sconset. Article 72 deals with property in the town area, which it covers the Surfside wastewater treatment area. So if we go back to the overview slide, basically the parcels that are outlined in green are being added. The parcels outlined in red are being removed. So the green parcels are added would include properties that in order to connect to the sewer on Nantucket, you must be in the sewer district. If you're not in a sewer district, even if you have failing septics and other things, you won't be able to hook in unless you're in the sewer district. The red areas that are being removed are properties that are not going to be served by sewer. So they're conservation lands, cemeteries, other properties that have no need to be hooked into sewer. So if we talk about the Sconset area first, there are 3 distinct areas that are being added. The first of those is the Plainfield Road area at the end of Burnell Street. These properties are in an overlay, water protection overlay district. They've been identified by the state as areas that need certain types of waste treatment. They are lots that are zoned in a half-acre district, so they are below the minimum of 1 acre and are basically needed to be hooked in. The next group is a cluster subdivision off of Milestone Road and New Lane and New Street. Sorry, I can't remember that one. In Sconset, this area had been identified before as also being in the water protection area. There is a community septic system that is part of the cluster subdivision that neighborhood residents are finding difficult to, they don't really have the expertise to manage such a system, and they've requested to be put into the sewer, which will solve their particular problems. In Stone Post Way, the Board of Selectmen, acting as the sewer commissioners, pointed out this is the one area in this lower portion of Sconset that maybe should be included at this time. It's surrounded by the sewer district shown in blue, and so that was also included. In the town area, there's, again, 3 distinct areas. The area around Bayberry Lane and at the end of Tacoma is near the wellhead, which is here in the state forest. When those properties were built, there was no wellhead. That came later. But that is an area, again, that is close enough that it warrants their inclusion. An area here, also equidistance away, was added last year. The 40B, which is located here off of Rugged, is all connected, so it's actually a housekeeping matter to include them in the sewer district. And then the last area on the last slide is an area of town infill, which the Comprehensive Wastewater Management Plan identified in the fall of 2014 as warranting inclusion. This is in the Derrymore Road area. There have been additions over the past years here along Pilgrim and Derrymore. This closes this district. There are resources such as ponds and other features here that warrant inclusion. And this is also a small lot, basically R1, 5,000 square foot district. So this is also warranted for inclusion. Article 75, I don't have a slide for. It was given a negative recommendation by the sewer commissioners and I guess a motion not to adopt by the Finance Committee. If that article is to advance, it will need a 2/3 majority because of those earlier votes. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. Next, we're going to hear from Scott Leonard, who's at the other end of the table here, who's the sponsor of the balloon ban, article number 80. And Scott, we'd like you to tell us what this article is intended to accomplish and how it would do so.
Thank you, Peter. And thank you all for being here. I've quickly written myself an introduction. I had no idea that I was going to be sitting up on a table in front of people. It's kind of fun. Anyone who's spent time outdoors on Nantucket, and that's most of you, will be aware of the visible pollution caused by lighter-than-air or helium balloons. You see them on the beach, you see them in open space. They're pretty much ubiquitous. A lot of them come from other places. You find balloons from New York, New Jersey. We found balloons from Ohio. But I'll get to that. That raises the question as to what happens to our balloons when they go up. And this whole process started in 2012 when I decided with the Nantucket Marine Mammal Conservation Program, of which I'm the director, to do a survey of folks coming to the farmers market. And in 8 farmers markets, and sitting on Main Street 25 times, and you might know Gene Rio, who's been doing it for about 30 years, we gathered 2,286 signatures from people saying that they believe there should be a ban on lighter-than-air helium balloons. I use the word lighter than air simply because there are other gases that could be used to fill these balloons, and we would like to put a ban on all of them. From that petition that we got 2,286 signatures on, I wrote a letter that I sent around to environmental and conservation groups on island. That letter kind of laid out the stats and the issues with lighter-than-air gas balloons. And from that, 10 of the organizations on island, 9 including the Nantucket Marine Mammal Conservation Program, signed on. And I'm just going to quickly read those off to you so that you know who's supporting this. We had the Clean Team, Mass Audubon, Nantucket Land Council, Nantucket Safe Harbor for Animals, Nantucket Land Bank, Nantucket Outrigger, Nantucket Offshore Animal Hospital, Shearwater Excursions, Captain Blair Perkins, the Whale Watch and Seal Watch group on island, and Sustainable Nantucket. I then started developing on this idea, and we got it written into the warrant that we're considering, and I'll read that to you very quickly, because it's an addition to a solid waste article. It's a chapter that's already in our warrants. And this is going to be inserted, if passed, into Chapter 125-2, Solid Waste Disposal. A ban on the sale and or use of any type of balloon, including and not limited to plastic, latex, or mylar balloons, to be inflated with any type of lighter-than-air gas, including and not limited to helium gas. People importing such novelties from off-island, but disposing of them on island in any manner other than being contained in a plastic trash bag and transported to the landfill shall be fined pursuant to the provisions of Chapter 1, Article 2, non-criminal disposition at $50 per offense. That's what we have. I'm going to play a little bit of devil's advocate here, just because these might answer some of the questions that pop into your mind. And this is a little printout that I did from the Balloon Council, which is, of course, the industry. And they present their myths and facts. First myth is what we're talking about, litter. They say balloons create a large amount of litter, question mark. Fact, latex balloons are biodegradable and, in fact, do not make up for a large percentage of litter. They say that in a coastal cleanup, balloons and balloon pieces counted for less than 0.7% of the total debris collected. That's interesting. The National Marine Debris Monitoring Program, 3 years ago, sponsored by the EPA, said, and I quote, "The study found plastic straws, plastic bottles, plastic bags, metal beverage cans, and balloons to be the most abundant types of marine debris littering our coasts." The second myth that the industry talks about is the harm of balloon releases. Obviously, they're saying that there is no harm. When executed properly, latex balloon releases are fine. Once a latex balloon is released, research shows most of these latex balloons rise to an altitude of about 5 miles, where they freeze, break into spaghetti-like pieces, and scatter as they return to Earth. Well, at 5 miles, you can do quite a lot. Spaghetti pieces, we find a lot of whole pieces out here. They go on to say that while some balloons don't reach this altitude, research indicates that in an average 500 balloon release, the unexploded balloon's return density is no greater than 1 per 15 square miles. And that immediately made me think, well, that doesn't sound like much. But the BP oil spill was 210 million gallons in the Gulf. And the Gulf of Mexico has 643 quadrillion gallons. So we know how much damage that little 210 million gallons did. Balloons have that same ratio. If you just look at 1 per 15 square miles, doesn't sound like much. When you look at the damage caused, it's quite considerable. They also go on to say research shows that regardless of latex balloon's ultimate form, when it lands it will decompose, forming a natural soil nutrient at the same rate as that of an oak leaf. The industry says an oak leaf takes 6 months to decompose. Outside of industry, that could be as much as 4 years. But even in 6 months, imagine a balloon floating around in the ocean, on our beach, doing whatever damage it's going to do. Their myth number 3. Latex is not dangerous. Well, it's not to most people unless they have allergies. But we're not actually, that part of the statement is true, and we're not actually asking you to put it on your hands if you're allergic to it. If you ingest a balloon, though, or you pull a balloon over your head, or you get tangled in the legs, or you get the strings tangled in your legs and arms and neck, that could be dangerous. And that's what, as the Nantucket Marine Mammal Conservation Program, we're considering, and what I believe we should all be considering, because we have bird entanglement, turtle entanglement. Sperm whales have died from swallowing one balloon. When we had our necropsy on the humpback here on Thanksgiving Day, Dr. Moore went immediately to the stomach and was looking to see if anything had been ingested. When we had the little pygmy sperm whale come up on Christmas Day, had we done a necropsy, what the off-island folks were asking for was see what's in its stomach, see if it's ingested anything that would cause it to starve to death and not be able to digest. And that's what happens. A full-size sperm whale swallowed one balloon, it got stuck in the upper intestine, and it couldn't eat anymore and died of starvation. Another myth, foil balloons cause more problems than they are worth. And then their fact is foil balloons should not be released. But if you sell foil balloons, and anyone who's walking in a Stop and Shop knows that there are foil balloons all over the place, they're called Mylar. If you sell them, they're going to get out and they're going to get released. They actually say foil balloons should never be released in their own literature. They don't talk about helium depletion. And I didn't know about helium depletion until I started researching this. From an August 2010 paper, Professor of Physics Robert Richardson from Cornell University in Ithaca, New York, winner of the 1996 Nobel Prize for his work on superfluidity in helium, and co-chair of the U.S. National Research Council inquiry into the coming helium shortage, warned the supplies of helium are being used at an unprecedented rate. We could be depleted within a generation. End of quote. And I add, which will affect the high-tech industry. Think of fiber optics, think of your screen on your phone. Helium's involved in all of that. This will affect the high-tech industry, the medical industry, and the military, and more. In something like an MRI scanner, the helium is recycled. This is not the case when the gas is wasted as a cheap gas and used to fill party balloons and as a party trick distorting people's voices, which I'm sure we've all done. Minnie Mouse, Mickey Mouse. None of this speaks to the animal mortality, as I referenced earlier. That's my big issue. We find on Tuckernuck, a few years back, the ranger found over 400 balloons in one summer season. There is a consequence. Animals do get entangled. They do swallow these pieces of rubber, thinking that they're jellyfish or some sort of a prey food. And they're things that we need to be aware of as we move into the future. And so that's where this article is coming from.
Thank you, Scott. A very thorough exposition of some unintended consequences or unrecognized consequences. Lastly, we're going to hear from Rick Atherton, who has sponsored the Coastal Erosion Liability Waiver, Article number 42. So, Rick, tell us what this article is intended to accomplish and how it would do so.
Yeah, again, I'm Rick Atherton. I'm speaking. The dot. There we go. I'm Rick Atherton. I'm speaking as an individual. I am a member of the Board of Selectmen. Just to clarify, the article is intended to deal with sea level rise and the impact of erosion on the island of Nantucket, and specifically dealing with properties that are within 300 feet of a designated shoreline. The article was developed by Town Council, primarily at my initiative. It was placed on the town meeting warrant by the Board of Selectmen, but I want to be clear, the Board of Selectmen has taken no position either for or against the article. The article is a zoning article, and essentially it does two things. It is a mechanism so that people who are building near a shoreline as defined are affirmatively accepting notice that there are risks in constructing property within that area. Right now, there is no such affirmative requirement that they acknowledge that. And it also is a mechanism to relieve the taxpayer and the town from any liability that might occur due to the construction of dwellings or other buildings within that 300 feet. And that is not the case today. There are a number of communities, primarily in California, which have long had such indemnification waivers by their communities, and I mentioned one, the city of Malibu. I think most people know where Malibu is, and Malibu has long held that anybody constructing buildings within what they call hazard areas, in their case it's not only shoreline, it might also be earthquakes or landslides, free the town from any responsibility related thereto. The article was not recommended by the planning board because it is a zoning article. It went to the planning board. The finance committee felt that there were indeed financial impacts for the town, and they're recommending its adoption at town meeting. So it will be an interesting dialogue. I think clearly we all know erosion is prevalent around the island. And again, this is doing two things. One, it provides notice, and number two, relieves the town and the taxpayers from financial liability related thereto. Thank you.
Thank you, Rick. And I did want to remind you, if those of you who haven't got a copy of the yellow sheet, we do have a fact sheet with factual information pertaining to two of the articles, Article 70, the Hospital Overlay District, and Article 42, the one that Rick has just explained on coastal erosion liability waivers. So this gives you the words. We're now going to transition to the questions that have been submitted, and you're still free to submit more questions. I think we have more time than I had planned. And I'm going to start out with a question for Jim Kelly, and you can answer this, Jim, by simply uttering two numbers. You don't even have to put it in a sentence. The question is, what is the current height of the hospital? And secondly, how high would the hospital be?
The current height of the hospital at its highest point is 47 feet. If you include the chimney, it's 50 feet. And as we developed, worked with the planning board to look at the height limitation in the language of the hospital overlay district, we looked at the heights of other buildings in our neighborhood, if you will. The height of the new Boys and Girls Club is 47 feet. The height of the high school is 50.5 feet. So for our planning purposes, if when Article 70 is approved, we will be able to finalize our plans, and we'll end up with something in the 47 to 50 foot range.
Thank you, Jim. This one is for you, Rick, and it pertains to the hospital again. Would the hospital buy the Mill Hill property from the town?
Well, the article is permissive. It doesn't define the financial relationship that might develop between the hospital and the town. It leaves that authority to the Board of Selectmen. The property could be leased or transferred. Speaking personally, I think if it goes forward, I think the property should be leased for a long enough period of time, and also probably provide for renewals of a lease, much like the town did in the case of Sherburne Commons. So I hope that answers that, Peter.
Okay. This next question is either for Patty or Rick, and it pertains to Articles 89 and 90. Aren't there deed restrictions on the Mill Hill property against using the property for anything other than a park? So which one of you would like to answer that?
I suspect Patty might want to answer that, and then I'll comment.
No comment. And I'm going to also defer to Lee Saperstein and Annie Middleton, who are in the audience. They've done a lot of work researching this, and in their capacities have found that, yes, indeed, there are deed restrictions with respect to this property, and that those restrictions are similar to, in many respects, to and I'm going to possibly misspeak here a little bit, but the deed restrictions, as the notes here tell me, are to restrict the use of the park, to the area as a public park, and that there would have to be a proposal to the State House to change that. And so, yes, the deed restrictions are there, they're in place, and they're formidable to the extent that they're not something we as a community could actually jump over.
Right, and I would agree with that. The state, however, recognizes there may be times where parkland or other restricted property in many communities around the state, it's appropriate for the benefit of the community as a whole to reposition that use. And that's why Chapter 97 exists, and that's why it's a steep hurdle to overcome. But the state recognizes, as I say, there are times and there is a process, and it has been followed here on the island previously. It's not impossible.
Thank you. Some of these are going to seem partially redundant, but I want to get each of the questions asked to you. This one, I think, again, would be either to Rick or Patty. The new plan to build the hospital in the existing site seems to be workable. Why do we need any part of Mill Hill? Can either of you answer that?
Well, I'm happy to start on that. I think it's interesting. I've heard people say that, if the hospital ever feels it has to use a portion of Mill Hill, they can come back and ask. I think we need to be practical. This has been a convoluted enough process from the beginning, and I think if town meeting doesn't want Mill Hill to be used in any fashion, they are very unlikely to come back. They've made it clear at the moment publicly that they intend to build on their own property, and if they do, that's fine. I think, however, that a little bit of extra property, given the significant change over time in the hospital's mission and the types of services it provides, and on the limited amount of space today, some extra space, I think is in the community interest. I'm speaking as an individual. And I think we need to exercise that, give them that flexibility now. Otherwise, I think they will just never come back.
And from my perspective, and this perspective obviously is informed by a few years of my own dealings with the town and its leasing and giving properties. And I look to Sherburne Commons, unfortunately, as an example of where we had some difficulties. Good intentions never make good policy. And while we do have a sympathetic case with respect, this is a hospital, we all recognize the need for a better facility, ultimately we need to know what we're getting into as far as what the hospital's plans are for the property, how much of the property. It's a significant piece of this this hill, and again, I don't want to dwarf its importance to the, if you do the balance sheet, yes, we have a hospital who has needs. Yes, that hospital has a certain footprint that they're feeling comfortable, at least at this time, of using for their new building. But we also have a commitment historically as well as to the proprietors who deem this as a parkland, and to those of us who enjoy and use that property today, to respect that property as park. And it's a strong issue for me with respect to this area. There's not that much to choose from in Central Island as far as parkland. We all know we can go out and there's open space that has been preserved with respect to the moors and other areas. But unfortunately, in the residential areas, in the commercial areas, we're looking for more integration of time and places where we can value and use this kind of space. And I believe that this was something that goes back to the original island, and this is something we should hold historically in place.
Can I just make one further comment? Just to point out that the land bank has already purchased contiguous property that's adjacent to the park, so the park's been expanded. So part of, if the town meeting feels the use of this limited amount of space is appropriate, some of that has already been given back. The land bank also owns property between the Colored Cemetery and Vesper Lane, which might at some point be utilized as a park as well. Interestingly, the town is in the process of transferring other property around the town for park purposes to be managed by the land bank. So it's quite possible that the integration of the Mill Hill Park, now owned by the town, and the piece I just mentioned, owned by the land bank, might become part of an overall and a larger Mill Hill Park property.
I'm going to resist going back and forth since I assume this is not a debate.
The next question pertains to Article 53, the Daffodil Lane and Mayflower Circle rezoning. And the question here, either for Patty or Dave, is will these houses be on sewer or septic systems?
I don't mind handling that at all. It's in the sewer district, and what we didn't note before, so this gives me an opportunity to note now, is all that infrastructure would be paid for and installed and put in place by the Richmond company, Richmond Great Point Development. This is not something that we're seeking any public funds to do, and it is certainly something that we see as a value to this area because of its proximity to, the watershed, and will be engaged in that. I should say, too, that the property itself is already zoned as a whole, and this is probably something I should have mentioned in the introduction. I know there was concerns about the future. This is a residential zoned area. It already is a residential zoned area. We also have commercial zoned area. We also have retail zoned area. The question about what is to come as far as the properties are concerned is very easily answered by the zoning that's currently in place with respect to how much of it would be residential, how much is going to be preserved for the use of folks like landscapers, commercial, industrial, which we're committed to as well. And the area itself has all been incorporated into the sewer district, and we are already in a few weeks going to start putting in some sewer along Gregland Avenue and Davkim Avenue, so that we're making progress in the infrastructure area to help that, water quality issues in the Guwaki property already.
Okay, staying on the sewer theme, this one is for Andrew, and it pertains to Article 55. And the question here for you is, what is the impact of Article 55 on the sewer plant, if you can tell us anything about that?
Okay, so the parcels in Article 55 are not in the sewer district, so there is no impact to them, to the current sewer plan. One of the sub areas of the South Shore area has been identified in the needs area of Maya Comet. That's an area that would be serviced by sewer at some point in the future anyway.
All right, and another one for you. This one is it says it's for Article 72, but I assume that means 71 or 75. How will these inclusions impact the sewer plant, once again? 71 or 75, I think, is what they meant.
Okay, I'm thinking it might be 72.
Well, it says 72. That's the,
okay.
If you can answer with respect to 72, even though we're not addressing that, right?
Right, so 72, all of the subject lots are either already connected to the sewer, or they've been identified in the updated CWMP. So they have all been accounted for, and they are all planned. So there is no new impact.
Okay. Now, Article 63, I think this one may be for you, Leslie. It says, quote, movable trailer. Is this type of dwelling real or personal property? If, as I suspect that it is personal chattel, then is it subject to rapid depreciation?
Okay. All right. I'm not really sure what the answer to that question is, but what I will say is that one of the big concerns that the board had was the movable trailer concept with Article 63, and that was one of the reasons why they gave the article the negative recommendation. The board also discussed, and we discussed at the staff level, is it a mobile or like an RV that's not subject to HDC, not subject to building code, that's only, licensed as a vehicle? I mean, that was kind of unclear to us. And it was just something that we decided may not be the best option for the community to have these tiny homes on wheels. And so the same concept is in Article 62 as far as the size, just the mobility portion the board did not support.
Could I add,
Sure.
we also wondered how that would work for a steamship reservation.
All right, next we have two questions on Article 42 for you, Rick. The first is, how is shorefront defined and why 300 feet?
I'd probably defer to Andrew on how it's defined. I think shoreline to me is simply what it says, a shoreline. And the 300 feet is a unit of measurement that's already included in other areas of the town, I believe zoning bylaws. So the rationale was to use an existing portion, an existing distance.
The next one for you, Rick, is what is or what was the negative recommendation from the planning board based on, and what are the arguments against approval for Article 42?
Well, the planning board may want to speak for themselves. I'm not sure I'm going to speak for them. To me, it's, I suppose I did attend the meeting where the planning board took their vote, and often people like to use the phrase, unintended consequences. So that may have been on their mind. But they are perfectly capable of speaking for themselves.
And the next one, I think, is, not sure if it's going to be for you, Jim. It says, does the hospital planning use the ability to build below ground as much as possible? The same question with the school and the fire department.
Yes, absolutely. One of the options would be to have a below-grade floor. We would like to have it as much, maybe half below, half above, have some windows, but that's certainly within the realm of our concept.
All right, I'm going to see if I can read this for the first time. This question is, in light of the fact that this is the most downzoning proposals in recent history, has the town or the planning board calculated the environmental, cultural, and economic impacts to the island? And a second phrase here is, how much more police, DPW, fire personnel are and new sewer, water, and electrical infrastructure are necessary to support this growth, and what will it cost the taxpayer? I don't know that anybody has an easy answer to that, but that is the question. And if there is anybody who would like to offer their perspective on it, I invite you to do so.
Well, Peter, I think that we've plucked out some of the articles to talk about that for we've had 6 years of the master plan. We've had a long history of changing zoning, and I think the question ignores all the other changes that actually have increased zoning. It's worth noting that 73% of the island is in either LUG 3 or MMD. The LUG 2 area is basically another 9%. So there's a very small area left where property can be utilized for housing. And in our report, we talk about a technique of using exclusionary practices. Large lot zoning, lots over 1 acre are generally recognized as part of that technique to either reduce population or keep certain groups of people out. It's something that is discouraged. It's discouraged at all levels of federal, state, and local government. And I think if you look at all the changes that have been made over time, you see that there may be an effort to sort of blow up these particular changes, but it's really not. It's not a huge increase by any stretch of the imagination, and it's been offset by a number of other changes that really haven't been discussed here tonight.
Sure. Patty?
Yeah, I'd like to add to that. It's and I think Ann might jump in as well at some point in terms of your own vision or your own observations. We are dealing on this island with a very unique situation with respect to housing, and when questions arise about infrastructure like sewer and the like, I want to reemphasize whether it be an individual homeowner who subdivides an LG2 to LG1. Those costs in those homes, or something like us where it's a development, those costs and those hookups will be paid by the residents. The infrastructure itself will be paid by the individuals. We are in a position right now, and I remember this from my days on the Board of Selectmen, where we actually need sewer hookups to help with the financing of it. So that's a very complicated discussion that I'm not going to get into right now, but I think it's important to remember that, number one. Number two, as far as the availability of homes, and this speaks to questions like how many teachers in the school and how about the other infrastructure. These folks are on the island right now. These are people that are living 4 or 5 families to a single dwelling. These are not people that are in safe locations. These are, what we all hear of in the air about the, basement apartments or the room that they find. I'm in this business not just to provide more housing, but to provide safe housing. And I really do think that it's time we started to look at the question, not so much of what we're going to bring in from off island, but what can we do for the current members of the community today? Those children that are in school that have no regular place to sleep at night. These are the questions that I think are underneath and part of whatever it is that we're doing here. I agree with the residents of the Cedar Crest neighborhoods and the Daffodil and Evergreen. We don't want to cluster affordable or even accessible housing. We want to mix this up as part of our community. Our community is mixed up this way. I think what the planning board is doing with some of these other accessible possibilities is to that exact vision. I think what we're trying to do is also to that vision, and I just hope people keep in mind that this is not and shouldn't be considered something that we're doing to attract new. This is something we need to do today for our own community.
The invisible problem of underhousing, I think, is what you're talking about.
And safe housing.
And safe housing. The next question is says, regarding all of the small, portable, and tertiary dwelling proposals, what is the current minimum size for a habitable dwelling as defined by the Health Department, and what would the new minimum be if these articles pass? And either one of you can address that.
Well, the minimum size is the minimum size under Board of Health regulations, so it's unimpacted by this. I'm not sure exactly. I believe it's somewhere in the vicinity of 250 to 300 square feet, but I'm not entirely sure about that.
But it's not impacted, that's the answer. I mean, these articles do not change that in any way.
That's right.
As far as you know.
If somebody is proposing a 100-square-foot dwelling unit and it doesn't meet Board of Health regulations, it would not be allowed.
Okay.
And there are building code things to consider here as well. And the building code and the health code standards are far below the 550 square feet that's proposed.
Okay. This is a question pertaining to Article 53, and I'm not sure if anyone knows the answer to it, but the question is, what is FinCom's stance on Article 53? Does anyone know the answer to that?
I think I do, although was there FinCom members, and Rick was there. The Planning Board approved our article and gave a positive recommendation. The Finance Committee, which doesn't typically respond to Planning Board recommendations, in this case sort of singled us out, and I believe it was a healthy debate. I unfortunately wasn't there. I would have liked to join in. We did present to them in February, and I believe answered a lot of their questions. But we went down 4-3. As far as a comment, I guess, I don't know what the comment exactly says, but I think that it's not, or Leslie can address or read it for us. Board of Selectmen as well considered the article, and they made a decision not to comment on it. My understanding is that there was some questions about infrastructure, which I believe we've met the answer here today, so hopefully that will bring us around to the Finance Committee. As far as any other general questions, I think they were speaking more to user fees, which I believe Mr. Vorse answered those questions. That's not a legal consideration, and it's not something that we would be necessarily in a position to have to address or need or know how to address. And finally, I think it's important for us to say that as far as the future of this particular proposal goes, or the opportunity here, anything we do still has to go back to the Planning Board, back to the HDC. There is nothing that we can do with respect to the actual building, just like any other project. We'll get the zoning change done, but all the specifics, whether they be questions about, the traffic or how it lays out as a neighborhood, must go back to the Planning Board, must go back to the HCC. So again, I hope that will bring the Finance Committee around. We intend to speak to them. I don't understand where the 4 votes came from necessarily, but I will be finding out in the next few weeks by dialoguing, and hopefully we'll be able to bring them with us.
Very good. We're going to be finishing early, and so I want to invite those of you who are seated around the table to think for the next 30 seconds if there's anything else you'd like to say, because we do have time, but it's time for me to issue a clarification in response to a question that was submitted here, which is who authorized Lisa to speak for the entire neighborhood on Article 53, Daffodil Lane, and it continues, it says, because her views are not shared by most of us who've worked with the Richmond Group in good faith, and the questioner has given his name. I just want to clarify that we invited a representative from Daffodil Lane, and we requested that whoever wanted to be the person who would appear here, please confirm with us. We awaited contact. No one contacted us, and so today I requested whoever was here to speak to do so. That apparently was a mistake, and apparently was only one side of points of view in that neighborhood, so I just want to clarify that. And ask if there's anyone else around the table now who, since we have some time, if there's anything else you wanted to say. If not, everyone is excused early.
Peter, I wanted to recognize at least Remain, who has assisted with developing some of the concepts for Article 99. I can't remember if we did that or not, but I do appreciate their effort on that, and architect Matt McEachern, a local architect who is working on that. So I did want to just comment briefly on 53 as well, is while I understand I was present at the Finance Committee hearing and heard their requests for information, I'm concerned that some of it starts to, and you can call it by whatever name you want, it's an impact fee or an exaction that is basically not allowed in Massachusetts. Other people have, I guess, experience in other states, Florida, California, where there is much more enabling legislation allowing for impact fees. Planning board, what it reviews is also limited by state statute. But if the Finance Committee and Richmond, enter into a discussion about finances, the planning board would certainly welcome that at its hearing.
Can I just follow up? I think, Patty, I was there as well, and I think the Finance Committee sort of ended up, and they did sort of move through a number of points, that, as Andrew says, but my takeaway was that they felt it was appropriate to have a better overall sense of the development of the Glowacki properties, and specifically the residential ones before us it's happening. Let me go back. Still not. There we go. Thank you, Jim. I think the discussion, as Andrew said, did sort of range over a number of things, but in the end, they were interested, I think, in getting a better sense for the totality of the project and what impacts it might have, and we're just seeking more information. I think some of those came out in today's discussion. So.
Well, and that's my point, and I know, Rick, you've been on the Finance Committee for a lot of years, but you're not the Finance Committee, and I don't see the Finance Committee here. And I would hope that they would have followed up with their own questions by attending today and asking those questions. And I do think that we, as a group that is trying to do, listening to the neighborhood, listening to the community, I would just ask that the Finance Committee come to a planning board hearing where we had all of those discussions and listen, come to meet the articles and listen. Oh, David, there you are. To those kinds of concerns, because I do think that that would have been enlightening. Thanks.
I just have one quick comment. It's very heartening to field support in the room and up here for a new hospital on Nantucket, and I appreciate that. Thank you.
Peter, I'd just like to add one thing, if I may, for the balloon article. The Finance Committee did recommend this article. So we've got 10 organizations and the Finance Committee. And I know that in town there are a number of other supporters working for town. It's a benchmark. It's kind of setting the scale. It's saying there's other communities around the country who have bans, partial bans in place. But it's like the sea level rise thing. You gotta set a bar somewhere, and so this is trying to set that bar so that we have a standard to go to, and we can move forward from there. Thank you.
Okay, are we finished? Thank you all for participating, and to those of you in the audience, please pass the word around that you can watch this as video on demand. Just take a copy of the program, the blue sheet, and that tells you how you can log on to watch it at your convenience. Thank you again. Thanks, John.
Collector?
I'm the collector, Rick. So we got you down in two roles now. You're two Rick Athertons. Yes, I knew you'd want to be that way. Hi. Pardon? Oh, yeah, right. I'm sorry for the slip-up, but we were waiting to hear it, and it was not intended to be a debate of pros and cons. Just tell us what the article is. So I think we got the point across. Yeah. Okay. I can't really get to which kind of a stage. I didn't mention your name, but I assume I'd rather not. Yeah.